If you're a MAGA man and you're watching this video, this is a sign that it's time to reconsider your politics. Being serious, even though I wasn't joking, the last 2 years have been rough for younger Trump-voting men when it comes to dating. Not that there aren't women out there who like Trump, there's just a reason we've seen bitterness from these men on the rise, and it's not because women are lining up to date men in MAGA hats. If you've been online, you've had to see it. Whether it be the floods of men complaining about Obsession somehow being a misandrist movie, the rants by lonely young men who have never had a girlfriend before that go viral on YouTube these days, or the many headlines about parents and teachers reporting that young men in their lives are getting socially isolated and bitter. The irony is pretty glaring if you remember just a few years ago, when Andrew Tate was at his peak, and conservative men were fronting as Chad pickup artists, clowning on all the lefty virgins. Now the modern equivalent to Andrew Tate is a black-pilled guy with severe body dysmorphia and a drug addiction. Clearly these guys are not doing okay. Call me crazy, but I think the influencers these men rally behind is a reflection of themselves. The elephant in the room is that their guy is in power now, with control of virtually every crack and crevice of the US government. This basically took MAGA from being a populist political aesthetic opposing the last 4 years of a pretty unpopular Biden administration, to watching as the guy they built their personality cult around becomes a global laughingstock. Being a ride or die for the creepy old millionaire who was friends with Epstein and broke nearly every promise he ran on is already a bad look, but the MAGA movement's views on women are what I think it all comes down to. To clarify, I'm talking about young adult MAGA men ranging from 18 to 29 and their peers, essentially the newest batch of Gen Z adults as of this video's making. Older MAGA men who've been married and maybe even divorced are a whole other can of worms I can open in a different video. If you guys want that, let me know in the comments. As for the younger men, I'd be remiss not to bring up the now iconic male loneliness epidemic. It's worth noting that right-leaning young men are not the only ones reporting this feeling of longing. It's for this reason that I don't just write off this trend as complaining from online entitled men. I want to start by bringing up the classic Gen Z gender divide graph and talk about what it represents. For starters, let's just focus on my country, the United States, since that's where I live. I'll get to you later, South Korea. To be fair, this data is a few years old now, but the trends seem to be continuing even today, so I'm sure the new data that's being collected and synthesized and will be released in the future will show the same results. Taking a look at the red line, which represents young adult women, we see a sharp spike towards more liberal politics starting around 2010. On its face, this makes sense. The years since then have marked a notable shift in cultural attitudes around women's issues to be more forward when discussing them and unapologetic when leveraging feminist critique. It's safe to say American women are getting woke, and I mean that in the original sense of the word. They're waking up to the realities of how they're raised, educated, and treated in the world, and want to make a proactive change for the better. Platforms like TikTok also got extremely popular with young women, and its unique features made it perfect for them to just vent about women's issues and go viral among specifically other women on TikTok. I always say it's never good to lump entire groups together as a monolith, and I still do, but I think this is the closest to a widespread, united sisterhood of women that we've ever seen, and it's only getting stronger. As a progressive, I consider this a good thing, but you may start to see how it can be bad news for young MAGA men looking for a girlfriend. You might expect the same data to suggest a hard shift right from young men, but surprisingly, the data suggests the shift has been marginal compared to that of women to the left. Make no mistake though, that trend line is concerning. Most other sources besides this provide shockingly near identical results on the gap between young men and women over the years, so I'm inclined to believe this is more than just a fluke. This is pretty reliable data, and we're not just going off of feelings here. This suggests men aren't falling into the far right at an alarming pace like we thought. They're being left behind as women move left. Now we're getting to the main point of this video, the critical crossroads these young conservative men have reached, where they have to decide how to handle this revelation, as many have had to in the past. Do they accept that there's a reason the vast majority of women high-key want nothing to do with a guy who has those politics and the attitudes that come with them, make the hard choice and admit they were wrong, or will they choose to cope? As mentioned before, you've probably seen the wave of incel or MAGA male content lately. While it was partly the inspiration for this video, it's also a prime example of these right-wing men's cope with the hard truth. Instead of seeing women's shift to the left as organic and driven by a legitimate desire to see life for women get better in their lifetimes, they just call it a psyop. Pick any issue on which women have gotten more progressive in the last 16 years, and these dudes have a reason for why they are actually being brainwashed by a shady shadow scapegoat cabal. The more extreme and careless of them will obviously blame it on the Jews pushing feminism or something, but you can find some other pretty creative explanations from them as well if you go looking. Some of my favorite copes are nose rings, dyed hair, euphoria, legalized marijuana, OnlyFans, women's suffrage, big tech, talkies, and I could go on. It all makes for a fun circle jerk of self-pity and projected self-hatred that dulls the pain of so many women wanting nothing to do with them. By far the most popular cope is that which forms the foundations of the incel movement: looks. Supposedly, in the last 16 years or so, women's standards for attractive guys have just skyrocketed, leading to the often cited figure, only existing on dating apps mind you, that 80% of women only date the top 20% of guys. According to them, women are so picky now, the average dude just can't keep up. This mindset is no doubt what has propelled Clavicular so far, as his philosophy is entirely skin deep. If you aren't hot, you'll die alone. This is somehow an easier thing to accept than the idea that they're the ones who are wrong. In a way, it seems like they want to give up control over whether or not they're deemed desirable and blame it on the universe if they aren't. It's worth pointing out that despite Clavicular's brand being centered on looks maxing, to increase your sexual market value, he and his fans put far more weight behind things like bone structure, hairline, and height. Things you can't really change without the kind of money that only people like Clavicular have. Even if looks maxing does offer hope, most of his fans think that they can't ever get plastic surgery or hair plugs in Turkey, so they're a lost cause. This self-enforced feeling of hopelessness relieves them of responsibility and accountability, and leaves them with nothing but free time to rationalize their worldview even further in isolated spaces with other radicalized men or in complete solitude. That isolation is what creates far more than the casual bitter misogyny that was common years ago. These guys have never been more obsessed with hating women. All the while, women keep moving left without them, and they fall behind. So is this as bad as it gets? The good news and the bad news is no. It's good in that we haven't fallen so far as men that we can't reverse course culturally in quite a short time. But the bad news is that it can get so much worse. Let's take a look at this graph again and take a closer look at South Korea. Oh no. Now, I'm relying pretty heavily on my research here since I don't speak Korean and I don't follow Korean culture super closely, but based on what I've read, South Korea is experiencing the late stages of what we may be going through. Since 2016, Korean men have spiked more sharply right than American women have shifted left. All the while, Korean women are trailing just behind their American counterparts. I think a lot of us thought this is how America's data would look, but a quick glance will tell you we haven't seen anything yet compared to this. So what does this gender gap in South Korea actually look like, and what can we expect if this is where we're going? Well, some of the reasons made me a little hopeful that things are unlikely to ever get this bad here. For starters, South Korea has mandatory conscription. Every male in the country has to serve in the military for at least 18 months by the time they turn 28 to 30. Imagine that, you're like 25, trying to get your life started, and the government will arrest you soon if you don't go on and join the military, and then give up to 2 years of your 20s that you can never get back in the armed forces. This has been known to create a sense of extreme entitlement among young men there. It's hard to convince these guys that women have it hard when they have gone through or will go through the total nightmare that this can be. If you're curious, a South Korean YouTuber with nearly 1 million subscribers named TJ Toons was in this exact situation. He was in his 20s, had a girlfriend, 800,000 subscribers on YouTube, a stable income, was the breadwinner of his family, but that didn't matter. The state demanded his service. He considered getting obese on purpose, or even giving himself a permanent handicap to get out of it, but decided not to pretty much only because of how much trouble you can get in for dodging the military. In the end, he joined. They shaved his head and set him off on some brutal training. For a taste of what it's like, they do a whole week of gas chamber training, and it's exactly what you think it is. Understandably, almost every young man in South Korea having no choice in this matter starts to generate some resentment and jealousy, maybe even the perception that they are the truly oppressed ones, while any complaints women have are just petty. On top of that, they complain about the financial burden placed on men in South Korea. This one hits a little closer to home for Americans, as only recently are women seeing more representation across the job market, and many women still opt not to work and instead rely on a boyfriend or husband as a breadwinner. In South Korea, this patriarchal system is on steroids. Men are considered abject failures if they don't reach high enough in academics and their careers, all while trying to juggle relationships and mandatory military service. These pressures mount mount up, and these men choose to blame women and feminism, something they also blame for their also very familiar rise in male loneliness and lack of female attention. You could think that all these problems being caused by the patriarchy would make them more feminist, if anything, but they don't even agree with the premise that there is a patriarchy. From their perspective, women are living on easy mode, as I often hear. Of course, those that do recognize the patriarchy exists will fight to preserve it, because all the negatives in their mind are made up for by the perceived positive of women having a socially enforced requirement to find a husband. So, if you can't get these men to oppose the system that is making themselves and women suffer because they see the need for women to get married as a selling point, how do you eliminate the selling point? How do we get these men in South Korea, America, and elsewhere to stop huffing the copium and change themselves for the better? Funnily enough, one of the solutions to this international crisis of stubborn conservative men was born in South Korean feminism, the 4B movement. The 4Bs make no sense in English, but we're still calling it that because it sounds cool. It stands for no marriage, no babies, no dates, and no sex. As far as I know, there are no official carve-out exceptions for guys that aren't part of the problem. It's kind of just on the individual woman's decision how broadly they want to apply this strike for themselves. This movement has also picked up major steam in the last 2 years since Trump took office here in the US. I even made a video about it last year, which was when I first learned about its existence. Well, we've kind of come full circle back to the male loneliness epidemic in America and how these MAGA men can't seem to find female companionship. That and the choice they have to make as to whether or not they'll follow the lead of South Korea's men or steer the ship away from the iceberg field before it's too late. Women's lack of interest or even outspoken distaste for men isn't coming out of nowhere. If you think it is, you're part of the coping conservative men I've been talking about. So let's say you're a MAGA man and you actually want to stop coping now and start the path to becoming the kind of guy a modern woman might actually want to date. What can you do? Believe it or not, I wasn't always such a handsome stallion. In fact, I'd say I still kind of look bad as recently as my earliest videos. Some people grow into their looks, and before that point, they can look a bit awkward. That is to say, I know what it's like to think your looks are just too unappealing to attract any attention. You may be right, and you may be wrong. Only time and living your life will tell you on that front. But if you want to be proactive about it, there are things you can do. First, and I'm being serious here, you have to learn to see women as people. Maybe you think you already do, but it's not uncommon for ex-incels to admit they never really understood what that meant until they got older. Fundamentally, you need to see value in women that you have no sexual or romantic interest in and can get nothing material out of. In the same way that a guy who shares your interests might become your best friend, with neither of you expecting anything more than each other's company and the mutual love you have of your hobbies in return, you need to be able to, and then actually do, become friends with women, just like that. I know that's also hard in this day and age, but the idea of trying to make friends needs to be your main objective in your social life. Dating can take the back seat for a while. Don't think of yourself as single, think of yourself as looking for friends. And this advice does lead to you making friends with your future first girlfriend. You'll be glad you took my advice and took the path of friendship to finding a partner, and not trying to look-smacks your way into a relationship. And fellas, I mean this. Find some women to watch online who aren't total pick-me's, and actually represent the politics of the majority of your age demographic. Learn to listen to them, and take their words as seriously as a man's, and I promise, women in your life will be able to tell. It's also worth noting that the unanimous consensus from survey data and testimonies that the most unattractive things a man can be to a woman are also some of the most common traits seen in modern conservative young men. First, hygiene. Most men are probably good at this physically, but it extends to your clothes, your room, your apartment, your car, your general organization. This is super fixable if you're lacking, and young men tend to figure this out on their own as they get older and get used to adult life. Knowing it's holding you back, though, can certainly kick things into gear. Another thing is a lack of emotional intelligence. If you can't understand why she feels the way she does, it's a sign you don't pay attention, and it sours your relationship with women because it feels like you just don't understand them. They can tell. Finally, narcissism. Not like super over-the-top abusive narcissism, but subtle stuff you might not even realize you're doing, like mansplaining or monologuing. The best thing you can do is listen, and most importantly, ask questions specific to what they tell you. You might notice two things about this list of solutions. None of these things are as hard to change as your jawbones or your femur length, and these are pretty common sense things that would make anyone more likable to anybody. Basically, all this time, women have been trying to tell these men not just how to be romantically successful, but also how to be popular and have lots of friends too. They just won't listen. Accepting and taking action on those issues is hard. It's easier to just take the black pill and pretend it's everyone else's fault. All that said, while I praise the American 4B movement for putting pressure on men who have anchored themselves politically, I do worry about the possible effects it could have in the future. Some women are not just practicing 4B, but full-on separatism, as in no interaction ever with males. This just can't be good for men or women. Research on this is limited due to how unethical it would be to even test this, but we know that humans evolved primarily around our social skills. Paleontologists have argued almost every feature we have externally as humans helps us in some way with being the most social species on Earth. Cutting yourself off from half the population, specifically the half with the most diverse experience from your own, is known to have very unique and negative mental health effects. Notably, and probably relevant to this video, being trapped in gender essentialist echo chambers. At the end of the day, it seems the cure to male loneliness was the friends that we made along the way. Guys, I hope you liked this video. I did the research and wrote the script for this video over the course of a few days between live streams, so I hope you guys enjoyed this pre-prepared segment for a change. I also hope you enjoyed the gameplay too. Videos like this take quite a bit more work to make, so if you did enjoy it, beat that like button like it owes you money, so I know you guys want more like this.